I'm Kevin Sweeney. I cover college basketball for Sports Illustrated, and this is episode 78 of the Talking Grammar podcast.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Jeff Grammer with the Albuquerque Journal, and as you just heard, this is episode 78 of the Talking Grammar podcast. As I record this, it is Monday night, February 5th. It is the night before the Lobos resume Mountain West play, start the second half of Mountain West action. Their first 9 games were over last Wednesday. They had a bye spot in the schedule over this past weekend. They were the team that was off, and it was their first off spot in the schedule so far this season. And they resume action Tuesday night up the road in Laramie. Recorded a podcast earlier today with Kevin Sweeney of Sports Illustrated about bracketology, essentially, where the Lobos stand, where the Mountain West Conference stands in the NCAA Tournament race, all that kind of stuff. Got a couple stories written. Hit the airport, flew up to Denver, and I am now in a hotel rather, up in Colorado, and I will do the rest of the trip tomorrow up to Laramie, cover tomorrow night's game to start, like I said, second half action of Mountain West play for the UNM Lobos, who stand at 18-4 overall and 6-3 in conference play. Monday morning, there was a press conference previewing the Wyoming game, but also just talking about big picture stuff for the UNM Lobos. Richard Pitino was told during the press conference, the new Associated Press Top 25 poll came out, and despite the loss to the Broncos, the Lobos did remain ranked this week. They are number 25 UNM Lobos this week. They're that in both polls, but the Associated Press poll, when that was released, a reporter at the press conference told Richard Pitino, "Hey, just so you know, the poll came out. You guys are still ranked." And I wanted to share with you Richard Pitino's reaction to the news that his Lobos were still ranked. And here you go. Here's that.
The polls came out. You guys are still ranked in both polls.
Oh, thank God. Thank God, yes. What are we ranked?
All right, so there you go. There's the always sarcastic Richard Pitino, both telling you what he thinks about the polls, but also, if you notice, showing you he is just as curious as everybody else and wanted to know where the Lobos were ranked. So, as meaningless as the AP polls are, I'm an AP voter. I am one of the 63 voters. There were only 61 votes this week. I'm not entirely sure what 2 voters didn't vote or why, but usually there's 63 AP voters. I'm one of the AP voters across the country, have been for 12 years now, and our poll is what it is. I don't try and pretend to make it anything it's not. It is for conversation's sake. It is to keep the sport of college basketball in the conversation in any way it can possibly stay in that conversation during the months of November and December, and as things start heating up in January and February, you will see that the polls actually start to diminish in importance and interest a little bit as net rankings and it used to be RPI, but net rankings and KenPom and metrics and bracket talk start to pick up heat and pick up steam a little bit because people want to know, are they getting in or is their team getting in the tournament, what they have to do to get in the tournament, and maybe what seed they are. Bracketology is sort of a industry that used to be reserved to just a handful of people. Everyone knows the name Joe Lunardi, Joey Brackets, as some have called him on ESPN because he had the biggest platform through ESPN, but a lot of others, Jerry Palm. A lot of people through the years have started or have been doing bracket projections, but it is now an industry in and of itself with 100 people out there. I wanted to talk to somebody who does some of those. That is Kevin Sweeney for SportsIllustrated.com. SI.com. I asked him, look, I'm the beat writer that primarily covers the UNM Lobos. There are beat writers around this league and around the country that cover specific teams, and start hearing more and more discussion from coaches and from people around the program about this metric means the most, or this stat or this number means the most, because that is what those teams... That is the number that those teams want to push out there. That means the most because it's what helps them the most. Fan bases certainly do it too. What number helps your fan or your team look the best? That's the number you start looking at. I can tell you there are 2 teams in this league, Boise State and San Diego State, that thump their chest every chance they get about strength of schedule. Well, strength of schedule is one metric that doesn't actually tell you a thing about your team. It tells you how tough the opponent was, obviously, but by definition, strength of schedule tells you nothing about your team. The committee doesn't look at strength of schedule nearly as much as teams that have really good strength of schedule say they do. What they look at is strength of record. That's something we discussed in this podcast today. Now, strength of record obviously is influenced by strength of schedule, but strength of schedule in and of itself is not a metric that reflects on a team. It is literally how good your opponents were. It has nothing to do with how good or bad you are. The teams with the toughest strength of schedule every year are usually from the SWAC because they play the toughest schedule. That doesn't mean they get rewarded by getting in the NCAA tournament ever. So you can have a tough strength of schedule, but you better do something with it. That's sort of where Boise State is right now. They do have 5 really good quality wins, 5 quad 1 wins. As I record this, I believe they're tied for 7th in the country with the most quad 1 wins. The problem is they didn't do enough with that really tough schedule otherwise to have good computer metrics. Their coach, I know earlier today, Leon Rice on Monday, kind of said we lost sight of what this is all about. It's about winning, and it's about not paying attention to those metrics so much. It's just about winning. Well, 48 hours ago when they beat Air Force by 38 points, he was the one that brought up at a press conference that his team scored 1.66 points per possession, which is, according to Bart Torvik, one of the many analytics sites out there, something that hadn't been done in 6 years. And every coach will tell you about how good the numbers are and analytics are when it helps them. And if it doesn't really help them, and like in Boise State case, they aren't really good in the computer metrics, but they have more good wins than anybody in the Mountain West. They'll tell you that that's what's important. Here's a 48-hour swing with Leon Rice where analytics were something he was smiling like crazy about when he blew out a bad team. Literally today on Monday, he said, there's some teams out there that'll beat up on a bad team and their metrics look great. He literally just did it on Saturday. So it's funny how coaches will tell you one metric or one stat matters, and then when they're making a different argument or point, they won't. That's why I wanted to bring somebody like Kevin Sweeney, who isn't associated either in coverage or actually working for any of the teams in the Mountain West, to lay out exactly where the Mountain West stands. There are 6 teams: Nevada, Colorado State, Boise State, New Mexico, San Diego State, and Utah State. I think I just named 6. That are still in the mix for the NCAA tournament. As of right now, Kevin has 5 in, 1 out, and all 6 still have a chance. Some of them have a chance to get as high as about a 4 seed, he thinks, if things go right, obviously. But where are they at? What number should you as a fan be watching? And how's the next 6 weeks going to play out with this college basketball season before Selection Sunday? Hope you enjoyed this conversation I had with Kevin Sweeney of SI.com about the NCAA tournament possibilities of 6 teams of the Mountain West Conference. All right, Kevin. So what I'm kind of looking for in this episode here is I want to talk bracketology. I daily correspond, be it through emails or my articles or social media, which I'm on way too much, with primarily Lobo basketball fans, but also some around the Mountain West. But obviously, as a beat writer, it's a pretty Lobo-centric group. I don't want those Lobo fans and readers to continue hearing just one voice that they may think is directing the conversation one way or the other. I wanted somebody who isn't a beat writer to tell me, tell us, tell the whole league really kind of where this league stands. I know there's a lot of conversation this year about the Mountain West, so I'm hoping you have somewhat of an idea on where this Mountain West Conference stands this year in the big picture of NCAA tournament talk and how many teams might get in.
It's complicated, right? And I think the thing that's kind of particularly challenging is that the expert bracketologists do a great job of this, but even they are guessing what they think the committee will think. And I think sometimes when you look back, the logic and justifications don't line up year over year, right? Like there are certain patterns you can study for sure. But I think when you talk to people around it, like I think oftentimes it feels as though they come to a conclusion and then they find the evidence that supports that conclusion rather than look at the evidence and make a choice. So look, it's hard to sift through everything. It's also early February, and a lot of things will change. And it's probably not worth pulling anyone's hair out on whatever February 5th, February 6th about who's in, who's out, or 7 seed versus 8 seed, let alone. So, like I think that's probably the top line. But I think the league as a whole is in very good shape, and I think it's certainly good for the Mountain West that this is the conversation we're having, not like how do we sneak a second or how do we sneak a third team into the field.
I will say that the amount of notifications or tweets I get from people saying, "Look, somebody else has a Patino versus Patino 8-9 game." I'm like, it's February. If it happens, great. But yeah, the matchups are the least important part of all of this right now. Where you're sitting right now, maybe a little more important, but still not that important in February, first week of February. But anyway, we are here for that very topic. Let's start with the big picture of the Mountain West. Am I safe to say 7 down, and I'm saying 7 is like Wyoming UNLV range down, is not getting in without a tournament run, or I guess mathematically a UNLV could go 9-0 from this point on and get in. But I mean, are we okay with saying 7 teams down aren't getting in?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, UNLV, if they won out, would potentially be in the mix, but that's one of those. All right, like we're winning 9 straight, so we don't have to win 3 straight. Like the math
Yeah.
doesn't really add up there, right? Like
All
like
right.
consider the motor bitter bust right now.
So we're in the conversation today then of, and I'm just going to read them. I'll go. I mean, you can pick any kind of order. The local beat writer is going to go with the net. So I'm going to name New Mexico first, San Diego State second, Utah State third, Colorado State fourth, Boise State fifth, and then Nevada. We'll start with Nevada, because they, in my mind, would be the sixth team, and their metrics have certainly fallen off, but not out of the picture. Is that fair to say they're not out?
Yeah, they've got work to do now, but not out. I think the thing that stands out with them is that they, got some stuff done in the non-conference wins that I think will really matter come Selection Sunday if they are on the bubble, right? To beat TCU, who I think is a very clear tournament team, potentially like a top 5 or 6 seed on a neutral court. That's massive. Winning at Washington, that should be a solid win. Not a they're not getting in just because they won at Washington. Washington's probably an NIT team, but there's something there, right? But the way they've started, to be 4-4 in the league, to have a bad loss, to get blown out the way they have, especially obviously in that game at New Mexico, it set them back a little bit. And so not only now do they have to win some games here on the back half, and the schedule sets up to have some big ones, but I also think they're going to have to get some style points, especially when they play some of the teams towards the bottom, right? Like they have to find a way to get their net, their Ken Palm back into the top 50 and not be the outlier in that front if they want to go dancing.
I know there's not a magic number to all this, but what's the minimum, a net or a Ken Palm, which are generally in the same ballpark, obviously, that when we talk about this, but what do you got to get into to be in the conversation? Can you be in the 50s and still be in that large team, or do you need to at least get up into the 40s?
I think in the Mountain West, you probably want to be in the 40s. I think in some of the power leagues, there have been teams that have been able to kind of sneak around, get a couple of big wins, hang around. There's so many opportunities to build a resume that your predictive metrics, if you will, don't have to back it up, and you can sneak in. Usually, there's one team a year where you're like, they're 65th, they're 67th, and they're somehow in the mix. Arizona State last year was that team, and they snuck in the first four. But I do think that if you're in the Mountain West, you want to be in the 40s, and certainly I think you want to be below 60. I think if you get over 60, it gets real hairy.
All right, 30s would be better. Nevada, obviously, a team like you said that has work to do. I think all these teams have some work to do. We'll go team by team rather than kind of like who's a lock, who's in. But let's just move on then to Boise State, the team that a lot of people listening to this podcast or watching this podcast know last week. They're interesting to me, man. They got a really fascinating kind of resume right now in that the metrics have them, fifth in the net. They have them fifth in Ken Palm in this league, and yet they have 5 quad 1 wins. I think that's seventh in the country yesterday. I don't know if it still is seventh, but it's tied for seventh most quad 1 wins in the country. But all those other metrics aren't exactly lining up yet. So it seems like they have a good a nice, good little resume going for them, and I think they do in general. But those other numbers haven't caught up. Where do you see Boise State, and what do they still have to do?
Yeah, I have them in the field. I think right now they're probably in like that 8, 9 game range for me. That may be a little bit higher than you see with some of the other bracketologists out there. But I think when you look at the overall resume there, they've done a lot of work and they don't have a lot that makes you want to leave them out, right? Sometimes, especially at the cut line, you're really looking for like what teams killed themselves, right? Like which teams knocked them out with a terrible loss, and that home loss to UNLV is the only real knock on the resume. And UNLV is a talented team, top 100 in the metrics. Like that's not a disastrous one. I also think the thing with Boise, like because of the schedule that they played, and some of the wins that they have, especially that St. Mary's win early, I think has really aged nicely. Like if they finish strong and their metrics keep rising, right? I mean, this is a team that in early December was 85th on Ken Palm, and now they're top 50 in 45. So they basically cut that in half, right? Like if this thing keeps rising, and this has not been a unique story to this year for Boise, right? Like you look back, they've had a lot of slow starts under Leon, and then turned it and really got going late. Like if this is a trend, and they wind up in the 30s or 40s, like or the 30s or even maybe high 20s, right? Like I think there's room for them to really climb and be in that 6, 7 seed range that a lot of the top Mountain West teams are in right now. But for now, I think a little bit behind just because some of the predictive metrics don't love them as much.
I did see a stat the other day with their blowout win at home against Air Force. Um, it- I, I think that's when I saw it. Basically their November has always been fairly poor, frankly, under Leon, as you mentioned. But their January, they might be one of the top two or three, maybe the best January record in the country over the last like 3 or 4 years. So they kill it in January. They come back to earth a little bit in February, maybe. But they kill it every January. And they did pretty good this January. They did have two losses, but they picked up some pretty good wins.
Yeah, one on the road at Nevada, that's huge, right? Like I think especially in this league, like all these road wins are just ginormous. And you get a road win against the top teams in the league, so Nevada and New Mexico, to have those two in their back pocket. I mean, that will pay dividends, certainly to win a conference championship, let alone to make an NCAA tournament.
Colorado State's who I have next on the list. Let me take a step back real quick. I don't know that I pinned you down as of today, which is a very meaningless day in the grand scheme of things. I am curious, did you say you had Nevada in, or they have work to do to get in?
Nevada's out right now. I have Nevada kind of right around like the next four out. So they've got pretty substantial work at the moment.
And you, as far as Boise State, you do say in 8, 9 range. Colorado State, where do you have them? They're unique. I mean, a lot of these are kind of unique in that they have a big feather in the cap, one way or the other. And then they also have some kind of back to earth kind of moments like Colorado State has sort of had since league play started.
Yeah, I have Colorado State a little bit higher. So right now I have them as my last 6 seed. But by the end of the night, that might be down to the first seven, but they're right in that 6, 7 conversation, so a little bit higher up. I think to me, it's the work that they were able to accomplish in the non-conference. Beating Creighton in the neutral court is monstrous. Colorado's a great win. Neutral Washington, like they really put together a resume in the non-conference, and really outside of the Wyoming debacle, they've added some early nice wins in league play, right? Obviously on your home court, but to beat New Mexico, to beat San Diego State, like to have four top 30 wins in early February is huge, and I think that will set them up well as long as they don't. Obviously, if they took another bad loss or two, things could get hairy. But I think they're in very good shape to make the tournament, and I think they're in pretty darn good shape to stay out of the 8, 9 game, which I know everybody wants to, right? Like
Yeah.
no fan like loves the idea of having to play a 1 seed in the second round. So I think seven, a 7 is very realistic right now, and a 6 is certainly possible.
They're a team too that obviously with I guess I'll ask the question. It's sort of guesswork. We don't know for sure what the committee does with things like this, but Isaiah Stevens is a great story, a fifth year All-American candidate, fifth year senior, and a true All-American candidate, not just because he's having a great year in the Mountain West, but doesn't Isaiah Stevens and a little bit of name recognition with a star player help in any way in your mind? Do you think the committee leans that way sometimes when they see an Isaiah Stevens?
I think maybe a little bit. I think the thing that sometimes happens, right, especially for the mid-major teams, is like you just want to be in the committee's consciousness, right? We have to remember, like the people making these decisions are athletic directors and people who have all sorts of stuff to do the rest of the year. So like just hearing like, oh, I heard about Colorado State. They beat Creighton on Thanksgiving. That was a big deal, right? Oh, I've watched them. Isaiah Stevens is incredible, right? Like maybe that helps you a little bit. Maybe that gets you a little bit of benefit of the doubt because it does. You get down to some of these resumes and you are really splitting hairs, and you could find justifications for X team has a great road record. X team is great against Quad 1A instead of Quad 1B, and it's like
Right.
realistically like sometimes you just need something that gives you the benefit of the doubt. And I think Isaiah certainly would be the type of guy who could get you some benefit of it.
All right, so you got them a little higher than Boise. I will move on now. Let's go Utah State. They're the surprise of the league. Picked preseason 9 in the league. It's weird. I wrote about it in the preseason, but the 9 pick in the preseason Mountain West poll has gotten to the NCAA tournament like multiple times through the years, which is sort of weird considering you wouldn't consider the 9 in a Mountain West to be an NCAA tournament lock, and it's not a lock, but it has been multiple times that the preseason 9 has made the NCAA tournament, including Wyoming a couple years back. Anyway, Utah State, biggest surprise, obviously, in a lot of ways, but where do you have them right now? I will admit I'm a bit of a still sort of waiting to see how real they are, and we're in February. I know you for bracket talk, maybe that's early, but like you've put together a pretty good body of work at this point. Maybe I should quit thinking, all right, they're going to come back down to earth a little bit. So where are you at with Utah State right now?
So I think from a get into the tournament standpoint, Utah State is in unbelievable shape. So I have them as a 7 seed, just below Colorado State in terms of seeding. But I think it's important to remember there is a little bit of a slant when it comes to all these metrics. They're not just all considered individually. So the committee does tend to use quote unquote resume metrics, which is more of a pure representation of what you've accomplished. So that's KPI and strength of record.
Right.
They use those very heavily in who gets into the field. They use Ken Palm thinks that a little bit more heavily with seeding because that's true the quality of the teams, right? Like how good is a team. So, I think Utah State has some room they could drop from a quality standpoint as things work their way down because they still have a lot to do on their schedule. They had a lighter first half of the Mountain West schedule, but Utah State is 17th in strength of record right now. Like it would like what they've accomplished and winning some of these games that aren't sexy, right? But like beating Akron on a neutral court. That win means a lot when you're playing the strength of record game, right? Winning at Santa Clara, beating San Francisco in the Bay Area, like that, wins like that, winning at UNLV, right? Like you stack up enough of those, and you get to 19-3, you can make a pretty big dent without winning any crazy games, right? Like Utah State, I think they're lacking those elite wins, but when you look at what they've accomplished, they have enough good sneaky wins that they're in a very good position right now, I think, to at least make the tournament.
Let's KPI and strength of record, since you mentioned those two, and I know those two are the ones that maybe, like you said, lean towards the who gets in a little more. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why strength of KPI is one of the many metrics, right? And I don't know, is there an easy answer as to what differentiates KPI from a Ken Palm, from a BPI?
So I think the best way of describing it is that Ken Palm's goal, and I'm sure Ken could probably explain this better than I can, but Ken Palm's goal is using what we've seen so far to predict what's going to happen in the next game, right? So if you're beating teams by a million every time out, you're probably pretty darn good, right? You go 7-1 in an 8-game stretch, but to win all 7 games by 20 points and lose 1 game by 1, you were pretty unlucky that you lost the 8th game, is Ken Palm's theory, right? But KPI, like you can win by 100, you can win by 1. That's not really relevant. We're trying to grade what your resume looks like compared to other teams that have played 8 games, right? So, in that case, the 7-1 team would be higher, presumably in Ken Palm than the 7-1 team would be on KPI. But KPI is rewarding teams that play a lot of good teams, right? So, and this is maybe getting too complicated here, but like one of the main critiques of the quadrant system, right, is that you play team 76 at home and you lose, that's a bad loss. But you play team 75 on the road and it's like a season changing win.
Right.
Like that doesn't make a lot of sense. So things like KPI and strength of record, they do a more holistic job instead of just saying, let's sort these games into 4 buckets. It does a more holistic job of saying, okay, like you win you beat enough good teams. You had a 60% chance to win 6 games and you won 5 of them. You really accomplished something, regardless of how the style points were. So I think that's really what you're looking at is like it's more backwards looking than forward looking is what you're dealing with KPI versus KenPom.
And strength of record as opposed to strength of schedule. I've partly because every year I have to answer a lot of questions about the Lobos' fairly weak non-conference strength of schedule. I do tell people this: strength of schedule doesn't tell you anything about the team itself. It's literally how good your schedule was. So it's more of a barometer of who you played. It's not about you at all. The Golden State Warriors could play the easiest college basketball strength of schedule and be ranked 360th in strength of schedule if they wanted to. It doesn't mean the Golden State Warriors aren't a really good basketball team at the Division I level, right? So while I do say that, it gives you, I guess, more wiggle room when you play a tougher strength of schedule. You're given the benefit of the doubt, and if you win some of those games, it sort of proves you might be more Golden State Warriors than not. I don't know why I'm using them there. It's not like they're, I don't know, 3 years ago that would have been a better example. But strength of record is what exactly?
Strength of record is somewhat similar to KPI in terms of it's attempting to measure what you've accomplished based on the teams that you've played, and the strength of schedule is just who have you played. The strength of schedule is also like that individual number is not a substantial piece of like, are you getting into the tournament or not? Like the committee doesn't sit around and say, well, this team should get docked a seed line because their strength of schedule was 261 instead of 246, right? Like that's not how it works. It can be an eliminator in some cases, right? Like all right, like we're down to the last 4 teams, let's figure out who's getting in, who's not. This team didn't challenge themselves, this team did. Then oftentimes they're going to give a benefit of the doubt to that team that played the tough schedule. But I would say that strength of record number is more important than just your raw strength of schedule.
I do think it's worth noting too on strength of schedule. There are so many weird challenges that face athletic departments across the country that aren't equal, and a committee set up of mostly commissioners and athletic directors kind of understand that. And while it's really easy for a lot of people to say, the committee looks at strength of schedules, the committee looks at strength of schedule, I always try and remind people they look at other things a lot more than strength of schedule. Basically, what you did against your schedule, as opposed to just playing a tough schedule, is important. So, all right, we are 3 teams. No, we're 4 teams in now because you have Utah State as a 7. Let's go to San Diego State. The Aztecs made the big run last year. That, frankly, I'll back up a little bit too on this and say San Diego State's run last year, I think, helped a lot of the maybe national attention, and sort of maybe this isn't just an entirely pretending league, gaming the system and getting all these high metrics in net and KenPom and all that. Maybe this league can have some pretty quality teams. So kudos to San Diego State for that. They did a lot of good for this league by finally getting the monkey off this league's back of going one and done quite a bit. All that said, San Diego State right now, I'm looking at number, let's see, 20 in the net, 20 in KenPom. Where's San Diego State right now, and where can they be?
I think San Diego State's probably the best position from a seeding standpoint right now. I have them as the top number 6 seed. They could very easily be on the 5 line. I think there's upside probably to get all the way up to the 4, which is key in that you become a protected seed. You have a little bit more of a clear path to play where you want to play. You don't get sent 3,000 miles across the country to go play in round 1. the thing I think that stands out with their resume, there's just not a lot to criticize, right? They have no real bad losses. They lost at BYU. At the time, you're like, how good is BYU? Well, they turned into a top 10 team on, most of the metrics. Grand Canyon on the road. Oh, geez, they lost to, a WAC team. Oh, okay, Grand Canyon's really good and might get at large themselves. At New Mexico, at Boise, at Colorado State. None of those hurt. Eventually, you want to win one or two of those, but they did in the non-conference. They beat St. Mary's on a neutral court. That's aging incredibly well. They beat Gonzaga on the road. Gonzaga's not playing great, but Gonzaga is a team that their metrics are incredibly strong, and so winning that game on the road means a whole lot, even if Gonzaga isn't in the tournament. So I think that's critical. Even some of their early results that you were kind of questioning. Oh, UC San Diego, you only beat them by one. That was kind of shaky, right? Well, UC San Diego is now 9-2 in their league and fringe top 100 team. UC Irvine 1 point win. UC Irvine now top of the Big West. So their resume is really good. It's really like there's nothing to criticize. There's some big time wins. There's no bad losses. The metrics are strong. I think the upside here is pretty immense. It'd be nice to win one or two of these tough road games here in February or early March, but I think San Diego State is in the field without some sort of catastrophe happening down the stretch.
Looks like a ceiling of 4, a basement again, catastrophe notwithstanding. 8 maybe at worst.
I think that 8-9 game would be the furthest they could fall.
All right, let's move on then to the team I cover. The UNM Lobos they have not been in the NCAA tournament since a decade ago, 2013-14. This is currently the longest, excuse me, postseason drought, NIT or NCAA tournament since the pit's been open. We're looking at a 60-year span where they never went more than, I think, 5 years maybe between either NIT or NCAA, and NIT had a little more weight, back at the beginning of that span, but they want back in so bad. There are some people around these parts though that aren't just happy with thinking they might get in. They want to see them, win the league and get a great seed. But there are some question marks about their resume. So what say you about the UNM Lobos and their chances of getting in the NCAA tournament this year and where they might actually be seated?
I think they're in solid shape. Like I would not be raising any huge alarm bells at the moment with New Mexico. I think the thing that obviously stands out is just like the true quality metrics. I mean, to be top 20 on KenPom, I believe still top 20 in the net. Like they are like they have rolled teams and they pass every eye test imaginable in terms of like, yes, this is an NCAA tournament team. The things that could hold them back are really the fact that they've done so much of their work on their home court. And, look, the Pit is an amazing home court advantage. You don't want to take that away from them, but you also have to accomplish something eventually away from home. Like I do think it's going to be hard to get in, and maybe they will just kind of sneak in if this happens. But I think it's going to be hard if you get to Selection Sunday and you're 25-8 and everything looks pretty, but like who have you really beaten away from home? And like your best road neutral win is like Santa Clara or something like that. Like I think that would be a problem. I don't know if it would be enough to get them left out, but it would be enough that like we're waking up on Sunday morning and we are refreshing all the bracketology pages and we are like sweating this out and sending in lots of tweets to Jeff Grammer about how like rigged the selection process is and the whole deal, right? Like this is where we are if they don't do anything on the road. They could solve that. Win one, maybe two of these ones at Nevada, at San Diego State, at Boise, at Utah State. I think one of those road wins is probably enough to feel pretty darn good with the way that they played at home. Obviously, slip up here, there, it could get bad, but I think right now in good shape. I have them on the 8 line, so a little bit closer to the cut line like Boise State is, but
Yeah.
I think for now in good shape as long as they don't completely go over on the road.
I will say a week like this, one thing they have, I would say, kind of going for them a little bit, or maybe not hurting them, I guess is more accurate than saying going for them. But a week like this, like don't go have a hiccup on the road in Laramie, like can happen. Colorado State just did it. Take care of, avenging your earlier season loss at home against UNLV. This is not a sexy week. It's not going to build your resume, but like it's a kind of a pitfall week where you do then get a quad three loss maybe if you lose one of these and you don't want one of those right now they don't have that. They only have the two quad one wins and I think last I checked they're still at quad or three with the quad twos, whatever with the quads. But they don't have a bad loss, right? I do think that a home loss to UNLV or a road loss to Wyoming would be considered for the first time for them a bad loss. I don't know that the road loss to UNLV would be considered bad, but I think losing in the pit to UNLV would be.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. It would be a quad three, which
Yeah.
is if you can keep those two quad three and four quadrants clean, it's just much better for everyone. I will also say, and we had our conversation about scheduling and why it's hard, whatever. One thing I was just kind of noticing as I was looking through New Mexico's resume a little closer and looking at things like their strength of record, right? Like one of the reasons New Mexico has a weak strength schedule is because they need to play a lot of home games, right? Like you and I have spoken about this in the past. Um, so to counteract that, you want to play teams that will push you at least. You want to play like so I guess the best way I would put it is that you can really improve your KPI and your strength of record by playing a lot of quad three games instead of quad four games in the non-conference. And I give New Mexico credit because I look up and down the schedule and I see, you know, Louisiana Tech 67th in Ken Palm, UC Irvine 71st on Ken Palm.
I will say on the Louisiana Tech team and UC Irvine as well a little bit. I know they're big in the Big West right now. Louisiana Tech's a team that I remember when I watched them thinking, like, I like that team a lot. So I think that was a sneak. I don't think any Lobo fan is going to say, wow, Louisiana Tech, we beat them great. But I think Louisiana Tech, just since you happen to bring them up first, I think they're actually a pretty good team. But
They're leading their league. They're leading the league. They're really good. Like yeah,
yeah,
100%. Toledo wins their league every year. They're like 131st on Ken Palm right now. Even like UT Arlington's 153. That's probably better than you would have expected in the preseason with a new coach and whatnot. Like those are the marginal things that like really make differences between like if New Mexico's schedule was 300 central and it was just here's terrible team after terrible team, the schedules that a lot of Big 12 teams have played, I think they'd be in a much worse position sitting here today than they are. And I do think the people who put together that schedule, it's obviously a unique circumstance for them and how they have to operate. I give them a lot of credit because I think they made some good moves around the margins that position themselves well.
yeah, their lowest Ken Palm, team is Texas Southern at 277. So they didn't even get one of those 300 level teams. In the Mountain West, that used to be, one or two of their own teams, an Air Force or San Jose State, but not anymore. And then, yeah, who you pick, they need a better MTE. They admit that they want to get in a tougher MTE, but the one they did get in, wasn't horrible. It was like you said, maybe a bunch of quad threes. I don't think they realized Rice, maybe, although Rice just had a nice little win recently. I don't think they realized Rice and Pepperdine might be as bad as they were, but Santa Clara, Toledo were two good neutral court wins. So, what New Mexico has to do is, as you said, pick up one of those road wins. You're pretty confident they're in. That said, we'll take the bracketology part out of this. You know New Mexico a little bit matchup wise. Do they have a chance then of maybe making some noise regardless of seed? Seed would help them, but regardless of seed, does this New Mexico team make any noise in the tournament?
I think they can, right? Like I think talent wise, you line them up and they just don't look outmatched when they play. If you put them against the Big 12 opponent, you put them against the SEC, like the athleticism, the team speed, the size on the interior with JT Toppin and Nelly, like I think when you have high level guard play, you have size and you have athleticism, you have an opportunity to really make noise in that event. And I think that's what New Mexico has. I think the other thing is that defensively, they're so much better than they were a year ago, right? Like this is not a team that is going to get in the gym and try to beat everyone 110 to 105, right? Like obviously they want to play fast. They want to get up and down the floor, but I think they've proven that they can dig in and get stops against good teams. And I think that's going to be critical if they're going to win games in March against higher level competition. But I think they have the formula in terms of they have high level guard play with Dent and House and Mash as well, and then to add in just to be able to guard down low with bigs that can move and guard in space, but also have the physicality to hang in on the block. I think that gives you a chance. It gives you a chance. Obviously, matchup dependent, but I think they have a chance.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate it. Let me before we go ask you where can people follow you and what should people forget following you. We'll get to that in a second. What should people be looking at as they watch this bracketology stuff? Like obviously they can find the ones that make their team look the best and all that kind of stuff. I do think sites like Bracket Matrix are a good big picture because it takes so many sources and just sort of averages them out, right? So I would recommend something like the Bracket Matrix for most fans to kind of follow along. But what would you recommend? How can they find, KPI? What's your go-to?
Yeah, look, I think the way I would approach it is this. I think the bracketology quote unquote industry has become so gamified where like everything has to be. I mean, I was watching like the first week of January and there's graphics on the screen. Like if they win, they move into the field, and if they lose, they like that is so crazy because that's not how this works. It's so holistic a process that treating individual games, especially individual like not super high level games, right? Like obviously, like New Mexico San Diego State is a huge game. That means a lot for both teams. That's obvious, but that's obvious with or without bracketology, right? Like treating each individual game as this like well, you move up 2 spots on the seed list if you win this one. Stop stressing and worrying about that. That's not how this works. At the end of the day, what you want are no reasons to leave you out. So no bad losses, no eyesore metrics. You want quad one wins. You want a strong record overall against quad one and quad two. And I think at the end of the day, you want to prove that you're playing good basketball at the right time, right? Like don't give them a reason to leave you out because you've lost 5 of 7 heading into the NCAA tournament. So look, obviously that's not the answer everyone wants because everyone wants to overreact to everything. Like that's the society we live in. But like truly, like I think look at the matrix, get a sense of where you are. You can read Sports Illustrated's bracketology. It debuts here on Tuesday of this week, so it'll be out. Read wherever you'd like to read. Pick your favorite bracketologist. I don't care, but at the end of the day, try not to get wrapped up individually in one game or another because it's a 32, 34 game marathon, not a sprint.
This bracket industry, as you referenced, it's funny to me because I've been an AP voter for like 12 years now, right? And almost every week I'll get at least one comment about how the AP poll doesn't matter. And for 12 years, about 30, 20 times a year at least, I'm getting told how little the AP poll matters from a lot of the same people who read it every week and then tell me it doesn't matter. Well, it matters some because it just becomes part of the viewing process and the following process. But you're right, in the grand scheme of things, I'll tell you the AP poll doesn't matter at all for bracketology. And bracketology talks, while wonderful podcast content in the first week of February, probably don't mean a whole lot either.
Lots of work to do for everyone. Let's not go crazy here and drive yourself nuts. We're never going to make it to Selection Sunday if we do.
Awesome. So you got a bracketology dropping. The first one on SI.com is Tuesday?
Tuesday. Yep.
Where else can people follow you?
I'm also, if they're interested in bracketology stuff, I'm hosting the Fielding the 68 show on Field 68 with a couple of great bracketologists who do a tremendous job. Rocco Miller, Brad Wachtel, Andy Bottoms, Lucas Harkins. And then I'm on Field 68. I'm also still at Sports Illustrated as things kind of move along there. So SI.com and then check me out on Twitter in the meantime at CBB_Central.
How sick of this are you going to be by this time, even next week, and definitely by Selection Sunday?
I have a spreadsheet of all my bracket work every year, and the joy of closing that tab off of my Chrome for good on like March 17th is one of the best feelings in the world. So I cannot wait for that to be over, but I love it, right? It's part of why we do this thing. So
part of the process. Kevin, thanks a lot, man.
Thanks, sir.
All right, well, there you go. There was my conversation with Kevin Sweeney. Hope you enjoyed that. Again, as I record this from hotel room up in northern Colorado, it is one day out from the UNM Lobos resuming action in Mountain West play for the second half of their 18-game Mountain West schedule. 9 down. They're at 6-3, tied for third place, tied with San Diego State for third place in the Mountain West Conference standings, behind a tie at first place between 7-2 Utah State and 7-2 Boise State. Those 4 teams, in addition to Colorado State and Nevada, still have a chance at making the NCAA tournament. Technically, any team can still get in because they can win the Mountain West tournament and get into the NCAA tournament. But the 6 teams that have an at-large hope out of the Mountain West Conference, meaning they would get in even if they don't win their conference tournament, are the ones we just discussed. Hope you found that useful. Again, look at any stats you want. None of it really matters. Selection committee on Selection Sunday in March is really all that matters about who gets in the tournament and who doesn't. And it does vary. Every year it seems to be, one year they really are high on road wins. One year they're high on some other metric. We'll see what it is this year. Right now the Lobos are on the inside. In a pretty solid position, as Kevin said, but not a whole lot of wiggle room after a non-conference where they didn't pick up any major wins. So they got some work to do to be really comfortable, especially if they want a better seed than an 8-9, maybe even a better seed than a 7. When you're in that 8-9 game, sure, you'll take, after a decade of being out of the tournament, be very clear, the Lobos will take any seed that they get just to get back in the tournament. But the 8-9 game, look, you play a really tough first-round opponent in that, but then you also, most likely, face a 1 seed. So we're talking right now, the 1 seeds in college basketball would probably be like a UConn, a Purdue, maybe a Kansas, a North Carolina, Houston, Tennessee, those teams that are kind of in that top 5 range right now in the AP poll, and in the KenPom metrics and stuff like that. Houston, I know Houston's number 1 in KenPom. Anyway, those are the teams you might be facing in the second round. So anybody that wants a path to the Sweet 16, you better hope you probably don't get stuck in that 8-9 game, because while it does happen sometimes, it is highly unlikely that an 8 or a 9 seed beats a 1 seed in the second round of the tournament. So again, Lobos just want to get in. They got 9 games ahead of them now in Mountain West play. Starts Tuesday night on the road at Wyoming. And we'll see how it goes. Again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. However you are consuming this podcast, very much appreciated. The Albuquerque Journal Podcast Network appreciates you. Subscribe to local journalism. It helps us continue bringing you these kind of products, not just the written product that every day in the journal I am writing plenty about Mountain West and UNM Lobo basketball, but so is everyone else about on their beats. James Yotis is killing it, as always, on the high school sports beat. Ken Sickinger with Lobo women's basketball, also in a title race of their own in the Mountain West. Sean Ryder on new Lobo football coach Bronco Mendenhall. Rick Wright on all kinds of combat sport updates, including Holly Holm fighting soon. Got a lot of stuff going on in journal sports. abqjournal.com/subscribe is where you can subscribe to local journalism. It helps us bring you all of this coverage. Helps me get to travel to cover and bring you as much as I can about Lobo basketball. So appreciate you for being here, listening, watching, however you're doing it. Once again, this is episode 78. This was episode 78 of the Talking Grammar podcast. Until next time, thanks for watching.